Good day, and welcome to the second episode of the HEARTcare Podcast and Learn series. This Coach podcast series will not only teach you about important concepts related to your workplace well-being, it will also prompt you to be physically and mentally engaged. My name is Astrid Kendrick, and I've been studying compassion, fatigue, and burnout in educational workers since early 2020. This podcast series is one of the outcomes of my research program, as participants have asked for different ways to learn about how to feel better in their own pace and own space. Before we get started, choosing a walking path that is about 2 to 3 kilometers in length. Keep an eye out for tripping hazards and make sure you are dressed for the weather. Not going outside today? No problem. Hop on your favorite gym equipment or grab a broom to clean your floors. Choose an activity that will keep you busy for about 25 minutes. If you have a tracking device, press start and let's get going. Today's episode will introduce you to the signs and symptoms of burnout, one of 2 workplace hazards related to being an educator.
Before we discuss the personal and organizational features of burnout, we're going to listen to a passage from The Reason You Walk by Canadian author Wab Kinew. In this passage, from page 132, Kinew describes the Anishinaabe view. After a feast, we closed the ceremony with the Anishinaabe traveling song that we use to close all our gatherings in Lake of the Woods country. I explained the lyrics, Ningosha, Anisha, Wejin, Bimosayan, I am the reason you walk. In Kwekwe Kibin roundhouse long ago, Indede has explained that there are 4 layers of meaning to these words. They are from the perspective of the Creator, as though God himself were singing to you. The first meaning of I am the reason you walk is I have created you. Therefore, you walk. The second meaning is I am your motivation. The third meaning is, I am that spark inside you called love, which animates you and allows you to live by the Anishinaabe values of Kijewa Titsuin. The fourth and final meaning is, I am the destination at the end of your life that you are walking towards.
As you listen to this first song, think about why you took your first steps as an educator and what keeps you going each day. The World Health Organization defines burnout as an occupational phenomenon related to chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. Based on the seminal work of Christina Maslach and Susan Jackson, built on by other scholars including Michael Leader and Jody Carrington, several categories of burnout symptoms have been established since the 1980s. Individuals may experience burnout symptoms under 3 categories: depersonalization and cynicism, lack of acknowledgement and efficacy, and physical and emotional exhaustion. One way to think about the symptoms of burnout for individuals is as a journey away from what sustains us in education. I still clearly remember my first teaching job. I was so excited to meet my students and start to explore great literature with them. I carefully read all kinds of different young adult books and poems and spent every evening, late into the night, crafting perfect lesson plans. Lucky for me, I didn't have a spouse or children, so I had time to spend on my class learning. But late nights and early mornings don't mix well, and the grind started to wear on me. As I sacrificed sleep for perfection, I felt myself becoming resentful and losing patience with my students, who didn't seem to love the stories, poems, and novels I had so carefully selected. I thought to myself, why am I working so hard if the kids just don't care? Determined to engage all my students, I started getting up even earlier and staying up even later to create the best possible lessons that I could. I became increasingly frustrated and cranky, blaming my students for my failure to engage them, thinking, if they don't care about me, why do I care about them? Then I attended my first ever professional learning day and listened to a veteran teacher describe how he set up his lessons to engage his students. As I read through his materials, I realized that I had been working too hard on the wrong concepts and found a less stressful way to teach students more effectively. I made some changes to unit plans and started getting more sleep because I no longer needed to do as much daily lesson planning. Amazingly, as I took adequate time to rest, my crankiness, frustration, and anger at my students dissolved, and our relationships improved. As I look back at this time, I can see that my first step towards burnout was to sacrifice my own rest on the altar of perfection. I wanted so badly for my students to love English language arts as much as I did, but in my stressed out and sleepless state, I couldn't provide the emotional labor needed to create a safe and caring classroom culture. During this next song, think about what you've learned about managing your workload since you began your most current position. How do you feel about your workload? Are you sharing or sacrificing personal time to complete professional tasks? If so, does using personal time make you fulfilled or resentful? The symptoms of burnout can look similar to the symptoms of compassion fatigue that we talked about in the first episode, including hopelessness, disassociation, mental and physical exhaustion, and a numbness or apathy towards your students or colleagues. The main difference between compassion fatigue and burnout is that compassion fatigue is related to providing crisis and trauma work, while burnout is related to overwork or a mismatch between your work and your values. In their most recent book, published in 2022, called The Burnout Challenge, Christina Maslach and Michael Leader identify several organizational mismatches that can lead to burnout. They use the word mismatch to describe the relationship between a worker and a workplace, to refocus our attention on the individual, the context, and the relationship between the two. Specifically, they identify that mismatches in workload, autonomy, rewards, community, fairness, and values increase the risk for burnout. In the case described earlier, my mismatch was definitely in workload. I had too much to do and couldn't complete it during the workday. My own research study suggests that the two biggest mismatches in educational settings are with workload and community. With workload, there are too many assignments, too many kids, too many responsibilities, and not enough time. And with community, it can be shown as horizontal violence. So a person may say to themselves, I feel powerless within the system. So I blame and judge the leadership, my colleagues, and parents because I can't do what I want to do to change the system. Understanding the mismatches can help folks make a positive match by discussing or reflecting on what about the mismatch can be easily managed, changed, or let go. I realized that I could reduce my workload by improving my unit and year planning, which had the ripple effect of opening up time for me to rest. Think of a way that you have managed your workload in a positive way. What did you do? How did it improve your day-to-day work? As with all stressful situations, you may already have developed good coping strategies, but if you are feeling overwhelmed, your usual coping strategies may not be enough. If your burnout symptoms have fully overwhelmed your ability to cope, reach out to a professional, such as a therapist or mental health distress line, when you are finished listening to this podcast. Over a lifetime, people develop adaptive and maladaptive coping strategies to deal with everyday stressors. In the case of burnout, an adaptive coping strategy could include making a realistic assessment of your workload, values, and workplace to look for alignment and misalignment, or increasing your physical activity to improve the quality of your nighttime sleep. A maladaptive coping strategy would be to turn to substance use, such as alcohol or marijuana, to numb your feelings, or sleeping pills to force yourself to rest. In the earlier example, an adaptive coping strategies I used was to change my long-term planning so that I didn't spend my evenings frantically figuring out what to present to my students the next day. What are your coping strategies? Do you think the ones you're using are adaptive, or are they maladaptive, or a combination of both? Which adaptive ones can you use during your workday? Personal and professional supports that you could access in times of stress. Bring to mind a personal support person. When was the last time you spoke to this person? Now, think of a professional support person. As I talked about in my anecdote, the veteran teacher was a key professional support that I only met once at that PD day, and in fact, I never saw him again. Sometimes transactional or informational supports are enough to make a huge difference in your daily practice. Research has also shown that helping others can positively impact and reduce the symptoms of burnout. What are some ways that you can help out other educators this week? now you should be making your way back to your home base. Try moving a little bit faster or go up a nearby hill. By getting your heart rate up, you will feel more benefits of this walk. For the last part of this walk, try greeting other people as you pass by. A greeting might be a small smile, a nod, a verbal good morning, or a wave. Notice your emotional response when you are greeted by another human. Now you can identify the symptoms of individual, both in the personal and organizational realm, and have reflected on how you might change your professional practice to reduce your workload. On the next podcast, we'll be discussing creating a safe and caring school culture. Until that time, visit the HEARTcare Educators website at www.heartcareeducators.ca for more information and resources. And in the words of Joe and Darcy Hendershot in Supporting the Wounded Educator on page 52, good self-care should position us to handle the inevitable stresses of life, which in turn complements pursuing a healthy lifestyle, increasing our capacity for grit and resilience, and allows us to be fully present to enjoy the fun moments of life. See you next time.